She was only 13, a child who should have been worrying about school, friendships, and what to wear the next day. But on that night, none of that mattered. On that night, she was standing in front of a gun held by the man who was supposed to love and protect her, a man she once called her hero. The air was thick with fear. The house, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt like a trap. Her mother stood behind her, frozen, eyes wide with terror. The man they had trusted, the man they had once depended on, was no longer the same. He had changed. And now, he wasn't just angry. He was dangerous. Outside, the world kept moving. Cars passed. Neighbors sat in their homes, unaware of the nightmare unfolding just a few feet away. No one knew that inside those walls, a girl was making the most impossible choice of her life. She could run. She could hide. But instead, she stood her ground. She stepped in front of her mother, shielding her with nothing but her own body. The gun didn't waver. The man's hands were steady, cold, determined. His breathing was heavy, his mind clouded with rage. His daughter, the one person who had always looked up to him, was now standing in his way. Why? What could push a father to this point? What had happened behind closed doors that led to this moment? Was it years of tension? Was it something that could have been prevented? Or was this the inevitable end to a story that had been unraveling for far too long? This is the story of a family torn apart, a mother desperate to escape, a daughter willing to risk her life, and a father who made a choice that could never be undone. Tonight, we go back. We trace the warning signs. We hear from those who saw the cracks forming long before the explosion. And we uncover the truth behind the night that changed everything. Because in the end, it wasn't just a tragedy. It was something far worse. It was something that could happen to anyone. It was something that, for this 13-year-old girl, became reality. And when the gun fired, the world would never be the same. At first glance, they were a normal family, a mother who worked hard to provide, a father who once held dreams of a better life, and a daughter who saw the world through innocent eyes. Her name was Kayla Johnson. 13 years old, full of life and always smiling. She loved dancing in the living room when her favorite songs came on. She loved drawing pictures of her family, filling them with bright colors. Red for love, yellow for happiness, blue for peace. She believed in family. She believed in love. Her mother, Tanya Johnson, was the kind of woman who never let life break her. She worked long shifts at the hospital, coming home exhausted, but still managing to cook dinner, help with homework, and listen when Kayla needed to talk. She was strong. She was caring. And above all, she was determined to give her daughter the life she never had. Then, there was Marcus Johnson, a man who, at one point, had dreams of building something great. He had once been the father who lifted Kayla onto his shoulders, the husband who made Tanya laugh even when she was too tired to smile. He had once been a man full of hope, but something had changed. The warmth in his eyes had faded. The laughter that once filled their home had grown quiet, and the love that had once held their family together had started to crack. At first, the changes were small. He came home later than usual. He spoke less. He stared off into space, his mind somewhere else. But then, the silence turned to anger. The patience he once had for Kayla's endless questions, for Tanya's long work hours, for life's everyday struggles, it was gone. The argument started slowly. A comment here, a raised voice there. Tanya tried to brush it off at first. He's just stressed. He's just tired. It's nothing serious. But deep down, she knew something wasn't right. Kayla noticed it too. The way her father's smile seemed forced. The way her mother's eyes lingered on the door, as if bracing herself before stepping inside. The way the house no longer felt safe. One night, she overheard them arguing. She wasn't supposed to hear. She was supposed to be asleep. But the walls were thin, and the tension in their voices was impossible to ignore. "I'm trying, Marcus," Tanya's voice wavered, but she was holding back tears. I just don't know what else to do. You don't know what to do? His voice was sharp, bitter. You walk around here like I don't even exist, like I'm nothing to you, like this family doesn't matter. That's not true. Then why does it feel that way? Silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Then footsteps. A door slamming. And then, nothing. Kayla clutched her blanket, heart pounding in her chest. She didn't understand everything, but she understood enough. Her father was changing. And whatever was happening between him and her mother, it wasn't getting better. But still, she believed in love. She believed in family. She believed that no matter what, her father would never hurt them. She was wrong, because behind closed doors, something sinister was brewing, and soon the cracks would turn into a break that could never be fixed. The signs were there. They had been there for months, maybe even years. But like so many families who find themselves caught in the slow, creeping descent of a loved one's unraveling mind, Tanya and Kayla tried to push forward, to pretend, to believe that things would get better. But they didn't. Marcus had always been a man who carried his pride like a shield. He was raised to believe that a man provided, that a man kept his family together, no matter what. But when the world started closing in on him, when the bills piled up, when the job offers stopped coming, when the weight of his own failures became too much, he didn't ask for help. He lashed out. It started with his temper. A short fuse that had once been nothing more than frustration at a bad day turned into something unpredictable. 1 minute, he was quiet, staring at the television as if lost in thought. The next, he was slamming his fist on the table, knocking over a glass, his face twisted with anger over something as small as a misplaced remote or an overcooked meal. Tanya noticed the change in his drinking. He had always liked to have a beer after work, but now, it wasn't just 1. It was 3. Then 5. Then bottles of whiskey hidden in the back of the kitchen cabinet. She found them one night when she was searching for flour to bake a cake for Kayla's school event. 3 empty bottles, shoved deep into the darkness, as if he was hiding his own shame. And then, there were the nights he didn't come home at all. At first, he had excuses. Work ran late. He ran into an old friend. He needed some air. But Tanya knew. She saw it in the way he avoided her eyes, in the way his breath reeked of something stronger than just alcohol. The smell of cheap cologne that wasn't his. Kayla saw the changes too, though she didn't understand them the way her mother did. She just knew that when her father walked through the door, the air in the house shifted. It became heavy, unpredictable. She had learned to read the way he moved, how he threw his keys onto the counter, how he sighed before sitting down, how he ran his hands over his head when he was about to explode. Neighbors started noticing too. Mrs. Sarah, the woman who lived next door, had always exchanged friendly smiles with Tanya when they crossed paths in the morning. But lately, she had noticed the way Tanya's shoulders tensed when she stepped outside, the way Kayla walked a little faster on the way to school. One afternoon, as Kayla was playing outside, Mrs. Carter pulled her aside. "Everything all right at home, baby?" Kayla hesitated, forcing a smile. "Yeah, we're fine." But she wasn't a good liar. Mrs. Sarah wanted to say more, to ask more, but she didn't. She had seen too many women in Tanya's position, women who held on, who smiled through their pain, who convinced themselves that if they just tried harder, if they just loved more, things would change. Tanya did try. She begged Marcus to go to therapy, to talk to someone, to let her in. "I don't need help, Tanya. You're the one making things worse." That was his answer, every time. And so she made a decision, a quiet one, a desperate one. She started preparing to leave. She didn't tell Kayla, not yet. She didn't want to scare her. But late at night, after Kayla was asleep, Tanya would sit in bed with her phone, scrolling through shelters, reading about restraining orders, trying to understand how to disappear without making things worse. She started hiding money in an old shoebox under the bed, just a little at a time, enough to get a bus ticket, enough to rent a room somewhere far away. She started packing a bag, a few clothes for her and Kayla, important documents, enough to leave at a moment's notice. But she never got the chance, because before she could go, before she could take that final step toward freedom, the threat started. It was an ordinary evening. At least, that's how it started. 6 p.m. Kayla sat at the kitchen table, a math workbook open in front of her, pencil tapping against the paper as she tried to solve a problem. The smell of dinner filled the house, chicken frying on the stove, collard greens simmering in a pot. The familiar sounds of home, the kind of sounds that should bring comfort. Her mother moved around the kitchen, humming softly, her mind elsewhere. She stirred the pot, flipped the chicken, but her thoughts were on the small bag hidden in the closet, the one she had packed weeks ago, the one she was too afraid to touch. Kayla glanced up from her homework. "Mama, are you okay?" Tanya turned, startled, forcing a smile. "Of course, baby, just tired." Kayla wanted to believe her. She went back to her homework. Tanya went back to cooking. Outside, the sun was beginning to set. The world was quiet, calm. They had no idea what was coming. 7 p.m. The front door burst open. Marcus. Kayla flinched at the sound. Tanya stiffened but kept her eyes on the stove, as if ignoring him might make him disappear. He was different tonight. The air around him was charged, like a storm ready to break. His movements were sharp, erratic. His shirt was wrinkled, half untucked. His breath smelled like whiskey. He placed his keys on the counter. No, not placed. Threw them. They slid across the surface and hit the floor. Tanya turned slowly. "Marcus, where were you today?" His voice was low, controlled, but there was something underneath it, something dangerous. Tanya swallowed. "Work. Same as always." His eyes locked onto hers, searching. "You sure about that?" A heavy silence. Kayla looked between them, sensing something unspoken. Tanya forced herself to stay calm. "You need to eat. I made dinner." Marcus let out a short, bitter laugh. "Dinner? Like everything's normal." He took a step closer. "You think I don't know what you're up to?" Tanya's stomach tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." His voice was sharper now, accusing. "You think you're gonna leave me? Take my daughter and run?" Kayla's breath caught in her throat. Tanya's voice wavered. "Marcus, lower your voice. You're scaring her." "I'm scaring her?" He turned toward Kayla, his eyes dark. "You hear that, baby? Your mother thinks I'm the problem." Kayla shrank back. Tanya moved between them. "That's enough." His expression twisted, something snapping. 8 p.m. The argument exploded. Tanya, no longer holding back. "I can't live like this anymore, Marcus. This isn't love. This isn't a family." His hands clenched into fists. "You think you can just walk away? After everything I've done for you?" Tanya's voice was shaking now, but she didn't back down. "I don't want to fight. I just want to leave." Marcus was breathing hard. His face was red. His hands trembled. And then, 8:15 p.m. He reached into his waistband. A gun. Cold metal gleamed under the dim kitchen light. Tanya froze. Kayla gasped, her body going cold with fear. This wasn't just an argument anymore. This was something else. Something deadly. Tanya's hands lifted, palms up. "Marcus, don't do this." His breathing was ragged. His grip on the gun was tight. His eyes, unfocused. "Everything I built," he whispered. "Everything I gave you. And you just want to throw it away?" Tanya took a slow step back. But Kayla didn't move. She couldn't. Her father's face, twisted in anger, was barely recognizable. The man who used to tuck her into bed, who used to carry her on his shoulders, was gone. Tanya's voice was soft now, desperate. "Please, Let's just talk." Marcus shook his head. "It's too late for that." He lifted the gun. And that's when Kayla did the unthinkable. She stepped in front of her mother, her small frame standing between the woman who had given her life and the man who was about to take it away. The kitchen was suffocating with silence. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall, each second dragging like an eternity. Kayla stood there, her hands raised, her body shaking. But she didn't step back. She didn't run. She had already made her choice. She looked into her father's eyes, searching for something, anything, of the man she once knew. "Daddy, please," she whispered. "This isn't you." Marcus's grip on the gun tightened. His jaw clenched. His eyes were wild, flicking between his daughter and his wife. Tanya was frozen in place, her hands outstretched, her voice trembling. "Marcus, put the gun down." He didn't move. Kayla's breath hitched in her throat. She could see it, the moment of decision in his face, the shift in his body. She knew what was about to happen, and she knew there was only one thing she could do. Tanya gasped as Kayla stepped forward, placing herself directly between them. "No," she said firmly. "Not her. You want to do this? You do it to me." Marcus flinched, caught off guard. His hands shook. Kayla's heart pounded so hard it hurt, but she didn't let the fear show. "I love you, Daddy," she said softly, "but I won't let you hurt her." For a moment, the rage in his face cracked. For a moment, the father she remembered flickered back. But then, a flash of motion, a deafening bang. Kayla gasped, a sharp pain exploding through her chest. The force knocked her backward. Tanya screamed. The world blurred. The floor rushed up to meet her. She hit the ground hard, her body convulsing as warmth spread across her shirt. She heard her mother's voice, raw, breaking. "No! Kayla! Oh my God!" Her vision swam. The ceiling lights above her flickered. She tried to breathe, but it hurt. It hurt so much. She could hear footsteps, heavy, frantic. Her mother's arms wrapped around her, warm and shaking. "Baby, stay with me. Stay with me." Kayla tried to speak, but her lips wouldn't move. She was so tired, so cold. Her mother's sobs were the last thing she heard before everything went dark. The siren screamed through the night, growing louder with every second. The red and blue lights painted the house in flashes of color, cutting through the darkness like warning signals. Inside, Tanya held Kayla's limp body against her chest, her sobs shaking her entire frame. Her daughter, her baby, was barely breathing. Blood soaked through Kayla's shirt, warm and thick, staining her mother's hands as she pressed down on the wound. "Stay with me, baby. Stay with me," Tanya begged, her voice breaking. "Help is coming, I promise." The front door burst open. "Police! Drop the weapon!" Marcus stood in the center of the kitchen, the gun still in his hand. His eyes, once blazing with fury, were hollow now, empty. He looked down at the floor, at Kayla, at the blood pooling beneath her. The rage was gone. The fight was gone. All that was left was the weight of what he had done. An officer stepped forward, gun raised. "Drop it now!" For a second, Marcus didn't move. Tanya barely breathed, her fingers still pressing against Kayla's chest, trying to hold on to her, trying to keep her here. Kayla's breath was shallow, each one weaker than the last. And then, Marcus exhaled, his shoulders sagging. His fingers slipped from the gun. It hit the floor with a dull clatter. The officers moved in fast, tackling him to the ground, shouting commands, securing the weapon. But Tanya didn't care, didn't hear them, didn't see them. Her whole world was in her arms, growing colder by the second. A paramedic rushed in, dropping to his knees beside them. "We need to move her, now." Hands replaced Tanya's, pressing down on the wound, voices calling out medical terms she didn't understand. A stretcher appeared. Someone lifted Kayla's small body. An oxygen mask covered her face. Her skin was so pale. Her eyes fluttered, barely open. Tanya grabbed her hand. "Mommy's here, baby. Stay with me. Please." Kayla's lips parted, but no sound came out. Then her fingers twitched, just slightly, before they went still. The paramedics moved faster. The officers dragged Marcus to his feet, his hands cuffed behind his back. His eyes were locked on Kayla. Tears streamed down his face. His mouth opened as if he wanted to speak, but no words came. An officer yanked him toward the door. "You're done." They pulled him outside, past the flashing lights, past the gathering neighbors, past the horror he had created. Tanya stumbled to her feet, running after the stretcher. The paramedics loaded Kayla into the ambulance. The doors slammed shut. The sirens wailed again, and they sped off into the night. Tanya could only watch as her baby was taken away, her heart screaming a silent prayer. Would Kayla survive? Or had her final act of love cost her everything? The days after the shooting blurred together. Hospital lights, whispered prayers, the hum of machines keeping Kayla tethered to this world. Tanya never left her side. She held her daughter's hand, whispering stories, memories, promises. "Remember our beach trips, baby? You love the ocean? When you wake up, we'll go again. Just you and me. Okay?" The doctors said the bullet had missed her heart by inches. It tore through her chest, shattering ribs, collapsing a lung. She had lost so much blood. The surgery took hours, and then came the waiting. Days passed. Tanya watched every twitch of Kayla's fingers, every flutter of her eyelids, waiting for a sign. And then, a whisper. "Mom?" Tanya's breath caught in her throat. Kayla's eyes were barely open, her voice weak, but she was here. She was alive. Tanya collapsed into tears, kissing her daughter's hands over and over. "I'm here, baby. I'm here." But survival was only the beginning. The nightmares came first. Kayla would wake up screaming in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, gasping for air. Sometimes she swore she could still see him standing there, gun in hand. She stopped talking for a while, stopped laughing, stopped being the girl she once was. Therapy became a part of her life, learning how to breathe again, how to feel safe in her own home, how to live without fear. But some wounds don't heal overnight. Some wounds never fully heal at all. As Kayla fought to recover, another battle was taking place. Marcus was in jail, charged with attempted murder, aggravated assault, and endangering the life of a child. His trial was set to be one of the most emotional in recent history. Tanya sat in the courtroom, Kayla by her side, her hands still wrapped in bandages. She refused to let go of her mother's hand. Marcus sat across from them in an orange jumpsuit, his face thinner, his eyes hollow. For the first time, he looked small. The man who once towered over them, who once held power in his voice, now sat in silence, shackled and broken. The prosecutor laid out everything, his violent outbursts, the threats, the night of the shooting. Tanya testified through tears. Kayla, though terrified, spoke in a trembling voice. "He was going to kill her," she said. "I had to stop him." The jury listened, and when they returned, they only needed one word: guilty. Marcus barely reacted as the judge handed down the sentence: life in prison. Tanya exhaled, her body shaking with relief. But Kayla? She just stared at him. For a moment, their eyes met. There was no anger left in hers, no hate, just sadness. Then she turned away, and for the first time in a long time, she felt free. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. The scars, physical and emotional, would always be there. But Kayla had survived, and she had saved her mother. Not with anger, not with violence, but with love. And that love, stronger than fear, stronger than pain, would carry them forward. Kayla shouldn't have had to make that choice. She shouldn't have been the one standing in front of a gun. She shouldn't have had to beg for her mother's life. And she shouldn't have had to feel the white-hot pain of a bullet tearing through her body just to protect the person who had loved her more than anything. But she did. At just 13 years old, she made a decision that most adults could never fathom. She didn't run. She didn't hide. She stood her ground. She put her life on the line for the one person who had always protected her. And in the end, she became the protector. Her courage saved her mother's life. Her strength shattered the cycle of fear that had threatened to consume them both. But what about the warning signs? The slow unraveling of a once loving father into a man consumed by rage. How does someone go from a devoted husband and father to a person who could aim a gun at his own family? Is it the weight of unspoken pain? The burden of anger left unchecked? Or is it something darker, something that was always there, waiting for the right moment to surface? And the most chilling question of all, how many other families are teetering on the edge of this same nightmare, ignoring the warning signs, hoping things will get better, until it's too late? The truth is, stories like Kayla's happen more often than we want to admit. And the terrifying reality? Not all of them have a survivor. So as you turn off this video and go about your life, ask yourself, would you recognize the signs if they were right in front of you? And if you did, what would you do? If you found Kayla's story heartbreaking, if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, make sure to subscribe.